Awesome sauce. All righty. So, welcome to Talk Tuesday. Talk Tuesday is a virtual series of workshop conversations that provides a forum that amplifies the voices of marginalized and or underrepresented communities around various topics centered around intersectionality and social justice. The series plans to serve as a catalyst to promote, celebrate, and increase cultural awareness at Georgia State University, encourage cross-cultural dialogue and engagement, and advance global and intercultural fluency and cultural competency. Each workshop topic is uniquely designed and expertly facilitated to create a safe environment for authentic conversation, varying viewpoints, and cultural exchange. Selected guest speakers help to shift personal paradigms and facilitate learning and understanding through their scholarship, service, and storytelling. The topics and speakers presented do not represent the views of the Multicultural Center and Georgia State University, but are intended to reflect contemporary social concerns. All are welcome to take part to reflect on these cultural conversations. I am your host, William Brito, and on this Talk Tuesday, Rewind 1921, Remembering Tulsa, Reimagine Black Wall Street, in recognition of the 100th anniversary of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre, our moderator and panelists will pay homage and celebrate the resilience of the Greenwood District and the spirit of Black Wall Street. Participants will hear the perspectives of experts, thought leaders, and cultural influencers as they weigh in on the influence on the socio-economic advancements of the Black and African American community and provide insight on ways to optimize professional skills and generate generational wealth through innovative business ventures. Our panelists include Phil Armstrong, Project Director of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission, Steve Barge, CEO of Barge Consulting Group and co-founder of Tenacity Incorporated, Sonia Booker, real estate developer and visionary of The Vault, Dominique Gabriel, finance professional and COO of Designs by D&J LLC, and last but not least, Ryan Wilson, CEO and co-founder of The Gathering Spot. To give you all some context, it was inevitable in a show about lineage, horror, and family history that Lovecraft Country would head back to Tulsa to recount the traumatic events that occurred in 1921. Rewind 1921 is an episode similar to HBO's Watchmen that is deeply tied to the Tulsa Race Massacre of 1921, a real-life tragedy that saw mobs of white terrorist attacks Black residents and businesses in Tulsa's Greenwood District. In an episode of heartache and horror, but also one of perseverance, growth, and passion, culminating in a breathtaking sequence of brimstone and fire. The closing sequence echoed a soulful rendering of influential poet and activist Sonia Sanchez's poem, Catch the Fire, where she says, "I say, where is your fire? Can you smell it coming out of your past?" So let's rewind. May 31st, 2021 will mark the 100th anniversary of the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Despite its significance as the bloodiest attack on African American citizens in US history, it remains to many an unknown and to much more. Only as of recent has the event received the attention it deserves. Between May 31st and June 1st of 1921 was what the Oklahoma History Society calls the single worst incident of racial violence in American history. At least 300 people were killed, hundreds more injured, and within 24 hours, 42 square blocks of homes, hospitals, banks, schools, and churches were looted and burned to the ground, leaving nearly 9,000 homes. Thousands of surviving Greenwood residents, men, women, and children, were forced in internment camps. The Greenwood section of Tulsa, which was once the hub of hundreds of affluent African-American businesses and one of the most prosperous Black neighborhoods in the country, had been reduced to ashes. So, without further ado, I'd like for our panelist, Phil Armstrong, who is working on the 1921 Tulsa Project in Oklahoma, just to kind of give us a synopsis of what this project is about and why it's so significant to honoring Black Wall Street and Tulsa. Phil, it's all on you. Phil, you are muted. I can unmute you.
My apologies there. William, thank you again for the introduction and thank you for the background. It was actually quite excellent. I normally don't join and people have not done their research. So thank you so much for doing that. Actually a very well synopsis of the history. It was quite accurate. One of the things that I'd like to also bring out as the project director for this commission, and this historically is the second commission. There was actually the first state appointed commission to study the 1921 Tulsa race riot, as it was referred to back then, from 1997 to 2001, actually did an all-inclusive research into the actual number of deaths, because the Tulsa Tribune reported there were only 33 deaths. So this commission did the research and discovery to look at the mass graves that that we're discovering now, and that the actual number of deaths could be more in the range of 100 to 300. And then they also did a complete exhaustive review of the financial damages, all the filing of the claims, insurance and homes and business claims that were never paid out, and the amount that totaled to. And there's actually a monument that was put in place because of that. And that commission also offered 5 specific reparations that were presented to the state from this report, the state and the city, who were both complicit. And here we are 20 years later, and those reparations and the recommendation from that commission have yet to be affirmed by the state. This commission in 2015 was put together mainly to look at the 100th centennial, the 100th anniversary, and commemorative activities, events, and things that could happen so that we could once again readdress what took place, but more so enlighten, educate, and bring an awareness to this like never before, worldwide level. We met with community members. In fact, we had various community meetings to get to the point where we are now, and that is our pinnacle project is the building of a history center, the Greenwood Rising Black Wall Street History Center. It's being actually built and under construction right now. We'll debut it during the week of the centennial this year, the week of May through June the 6th of 2021, an 11,000 square foot facility that will tell the full narrative, the full story. The community said, don't just focus on the massacre. People need to know how vibrant and how wonderful this community was. Before you even get to a Greenwood, you need to talk about how Black people got to Oklahoma in the first place. You need to talk about the historic all Black towns of Oklahoma. There were over 30 to 40 Black towns established by 1880. That's where Langston University in Langston, Oklahoma came out of. The banks, the businesses, the homes, the property were all owned by Black citizens. And this is 30, 40 years before you even get to Greenwood. Tell the full story. And then the vibrancy of what Greenwood was. Talk about the massacre, but then educate people that time did not just stand still in 1921, but this community rebuilt itself, and they actually built it back bigger and better than it was economically than it was after the destruction. This is a story of the indomitable human spirit, that spirit of resilience that came out of the Black community. Black excellence has been around a long time, and this is a way to educate the world just how excellent this community of African Americans, this insular economy that took place in Oklahoma, and we're telling that story through this history center called Greenwood Rising.
Absolutely. Thank you, Phil, so much for that beautiful introduction and just a synopsis of what the Spirit of Greenwood Project is about. So without further ado, to begin this discussion, let's start by you each introducing yourself and sharing a little bit about your identity and culture and how that has shaped your lived experience. So I'll start with Gabriel or Dominique. I'll move to Ryan. We'll do Steve and then Sonia, and then we'll end with you, Phil. Take it away, Dominique.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. And thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it. Such an honor to be a part of such a wonderful panel, and also definitely like to, thank and welcome all of my panelists as well. It's such an honor to sit amongst you all as well. So for me, I am Caribbean, African American, so to speak. So I My parents are from the West Indies, from the Spice Isle of Grenada. I reside in Brooklyn. I was born in Brooklyn as well, born and raised. And I think that my Caribbean heritage has shaped my upbringing tremendously. I don't know if you all are familiar with the Caribbean or West Indian heritage. We are a part of a community where we are taught to work hard. Education is the key. You look to making sure that you make a difference in a way, and you try to work hard, build something for yourself, make something of yourself, but then also bring your family up with you as well, right? To make sure that you're fostering an environment that is prosperous for not only yourself, but also your peers and my siblings as well. So I will say that my background has tremendously played a significant part on my development and where I am today, and I'm thankful for that.
Thank you, Dominique. Ryan?
It's good to be here with you all, and I'm looking forward to the rest of our discussion. My name is Ryan Wilson. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the Gathering Spot. I'm from Atlanta though, and I attribute most of what I've been able to do in my life to being from this city. As I think we will talk about today, what we have learned about what was happening in Greenwood. I think in many ways, a lot of those lessons have transferred to Atlanta. We've got a lot of work to do here, but the context and place that I come from specifically is here. My entire family has been here for quite a while. A little bit about TGS. It's a private club rooted in community and culture. We have event space, a restaurant and bar and workspace, but the club really centers around the people that call it home. We exist now as the largest city club in Atlanta. Again, rooted in the culture, rooted in Black folks that drive everything that happened at TGS. So again, looking forward to being a part of the discussion and want to say hello to my fellow panelists as well. It's an honor to be with you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. Stephen.
Yes. Hey, everyone. Thank you. I want to thank you guys for having me on this panel, and also, recognize all of my amazing panelists today. My name is Stephen Barge. I am the CEO of Tenacity, as well as Barge Consulting Group. A little background on me. I'm originally from South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina, to be more specifically. So, if you're not familiar with South Carolina or ever been there, there's a lot of different things where, just growing up, you deal with a lot of different racial, tensions, or a lot of different racism and things like that. So when I left Greenville, South Carolina, and graduated from high school, I went to Voorhees College, which is an HBCU, a small HBCU in Denmark, South Carolina. So being from going to a small HBCU in college, it really kind of empowered me of just seeing the power of our people and what we can do and our potential. And then from there, I transitioned to Atlanta, and where I live now. I've been in Atlanta since 2013, and just being here and just seeing a thriving culture of Black community, being in the tech space as well, seeing a lot of people break different barriers that we've seen for thousands of years, as far as raising funding and having different resources that we didn't have before. It's kind of pushed, me into, just being a better entrepreneur overall. And just a little background on my companies. Tenacity is an apartment locating app where we just pretty much focus on streamlining the leasing process. We actually just pivoted our business model, and now we're actually serving private owners also, and we're providing property management software automation also. As far as Barge Consulting Group, it is a financial literacy brand that I created to educate people on the stock market. I actually initially launched this business probably like 4 or 5 years ago, but I was just doing business consulting, and I realized a lot of people didn't know about the stock market. So during the pandemic, I was able to create a community back in March, where it was just started off with like 5 to 10 people, that's grew to 2,000 people here today, where I've educated families on just how to invest in the stock market long-term and build long-term generational wealth. So just coming up from my background, you know, I'm the oldest of 5 boys. So I didn't grow up with the financial literate background. Only thing my mom used to tell us was just save, you know, save your money, you know, and that's it. So as far as just building wealth and having money and just really just growing my knowledge and educating other people, that kind of, you know, came when I was in college, and I was able to kind of really just focus on, you know, just really just investing in financial literacy. And now I'm sharing that with my people. So again, thank you for having me on this panel. I look forward to our discussion. I talk a lot, so sorry to take up so much time, but looking forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Stephen. Sonia.
Hey, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me. And to my panelists who I'm very well acquainted with, it's so awesome to see everybody. And for people who are not watching this in Atlanta, I'm in Atlanta's notorious traffic, and I was supposed to be downtown like, you know, an hour ago. So if you see my view of the scenery. But I am a real estate investor, developer, and have been in the Atlanta area almost 20 years now. I've written a couple books on real estate investing and grew up in Jackson, Mississippi. And in some ways, I kind of equate my life to like growing up in a small Greenwood. And my grandfather was very pioneering. We owned a lot of land in there, and he would and everything. It was a way of life for us. We would build houses, collect rent payments. My grandfather had a insurance route. So I always say that I'm truly my grandfather's child. My first entrepreneur venture was an all-state insurance agency, which I ran for 5 years in Lilburn, Georgia. And so that after 5 years and went full-time into real estate investing. And part of my quest through the vaults in particular, the vaults are old bank buildings that have closed down. And I started acquiring them a couple of years ago, and they have the original vaults in them, and just kind of opening those up to the community in the sense of arts, wealth, entrepreneurship, and wellness. And so at any given time, you're connecting with the vault for, a yoga class or home ownership or financial literacy. And recently in August, we opened our first school called the Vault Seed School. So we have 21 kids at our Vault Seed School in East Point. And that has been just an amazing thing for us. I have an 11-year-old who attends the school, and just to really bring those pillars and a different way of entrepreneurship and financial literacy to the kids' everyday learning truly starts to impact how we're, and how we're bringing everyday things into their world. And so definitely connect, with the vault and connect with the things that I'm doing. We're very, very, intent on building a well world. And when I think about Tulsa and just like Phil said, that the part, it really worked, which is why it was such a target. And, it would be really nice, and I think our work that we're doing now at this particular time is about really creating those models that work, because once we have that success back under our belt and we know that we can do those type of impactful models and neighborhoods and build community that way, I think it's a complete game changer. So thank you for having me part of this conversation. Thank you, Sonia. And last but not least, Mr. Phil Armstrong.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief. Again, it's an honor to be on this call and with everyone. We got some power hitters on this call, and I'm honored to be on here, not including myself when it comes to power hitters. So it sounds like this is a wonderful, wonderful webinar and an opportunity to talk with each other. Simply, I grew up in a small rural farm town in Ohio. I attended an HBCU, Central State University in Wilberforce, Ohio. Actually, Wilberforce, Ohio is the home of the oldest African-American HBCU in the country, Wilberforce University, founded in 1855. And so Central State was started in 1887 out of that. I mentioned that because once again, the pride and the excellence of what the world is just now seeing, as we have HBCU graduates now that are doing phenomenal things, namely our new Vice President, Ms. Harris, who's a graduate of Howard University. So Black excellence is something that has been bubbling up or as I said, a resurgence in many years of late. And I think we're just scratching the surface on what HBCU graduates are going to show the world in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. That trajectory is awesome in my opinion. But it was at I was a sophomore in 1991, and my college professor spent an entire semester talking about Greenwood, talking about the historic Black towns of Oklahoma, Boley, Oklahoma, the historic all-Black rodeo that was here for a number of years. But again, we spent a whole semester, and when I moved here to Tulsa in 1997, it was literally shocking to me that I knew more about this history than most of the citizens, Black and white, that grew up here. And it wasn't until later on that I found out that that was a systemic thing that was here in Oklahoma, that this wasn't taught, this was swept under the rug. They called it, quote, Tulsa's dirty little secret. And so moving here and the work that I've done, owning businesses and being on boards, and volunteering and just being a part of the community, and to find myself now from that history and being taught that, to find myself 20 years later being the project director for the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre Centennial Commission is really, for those that believe in it, divine intervention in my opinion. And I'm here for such a time as this, and I'm just grateful. I stand on many shoulders that came before me and ready to pass the torch to the next generation of this history, and showing the world how vibrant and incredible the original, the Black Wall Street of Greenwood, Oklahoma was.
Absolutely. Thank you, Phil. So panelists, I move into our series of questions now. Just as an FYI, if we could keep our responses to 60 seconds or less, just because we have a lot of questions to get through and we passed the less than an hour mark. And we definitely want to get you all's perspectives and your thoughts on these. So my first question for you is, well, second technically, is what do you know about Tulsa in 1921? How was the Greenwood District known as Black Wall Street? And we can start with Dominique, and then if anyone else wants to hop in and share your perspective, please do. So Dominique, we'll start with you since I started with you from the beginning.
So I'll be very honest. I think that to go back to what Phil was talking about, I would say that when it comes to Black Wall Street, that wasn't really taught to me. That wasn't taught within my curriculum. So throughout all of my years of going to school and even through the collegiate education, I was never taught about Black Wall Street. Now, what do I know about Black Wall Street? I know that through my own research that it was a prosperous community in which that they were basically the owners and the business kind of, I would say, for the business hub for Black culture, I would say, so to speak, right? And I think that that was kind of our first presence in a sense, because I don't want to say through my later research, I've realized that there were many other cultures or many other communities in which where there was Black centers of wealth. But I would say for me, that was kind of like my first peak of my first introduction to where Black wealth kind of existed within America.
Absolutely.
I'll jump in real quick and just give Dominic, you're actually right on point. Greenwood was not unique in that because of, and I use this term loosely, but the side effect, if you will, of Jim Crow and segregation is that it forced communities of color to be insular economies that actually, because of Jim Crow, were in a position where they had to support one another. They had to lend money to one another. They had to create their own businesses. And as a result of that, that's what made them so prosperous, is that the Black dollar rotated 8 to 10 times in these Black communities. So Greenwood was not exclusive in that these communities were vibrant communities, but it was just that the combination of land ownership and oil and gas discovery is what made Greenwood stand out as the largest collection of Black wealth of its size during that time. And those were the two magic things. And the first person to actually coin the phrase Black Wall Street was actually Booker T. Washington. He visited here in 1905. He heard about these economic viable towns and he visited them, and upon his visit he said, this is like being in Negro Wall Street. That's where that came from. Booker T. Washington in 1905 said, this is Negro Wall Street that I found in Oklahoma. In the 60s and 70s that turned to Black Wall Street, but that's where that phrase was coined from.
Thank you so much, Bill. Would any of our other panelists like to chime in on that particular question before we move on to our next question? All right, without further ado, thank you, Dominique, and thank you, Phil, for those beautiful answers. So this kind of progresses us into our next one, which is, had you heard of times and places where Black people were the wealthiest? Why or why not, do you think?
I guess I'll take this one. With me, just honestly, I really haven't heard of times where Black people, other than this, where Black people were wealthy. And I think the reason being is really just the resources that were provided and the resources that African Americans were shut out from, as far as acquiring real estate, as far as just acquiring education, during those times. So I feel like, right now we're kind of seeing like a lot of Black excellence transition, now, that we're in, 2021. And, just back then, we're still seeing some of the same issues too. It's a lot of different barriers of entry, from being an entrepreneur, business owner, raising funding, raising capital, things like that. So I think things that kept a lot of people back from those things were really just the education and the resources that they were shut out from.
Thank you, Stephen. Our other panelists, had you heard of other times or times where Black people were the wealthiest, and why or why not do you think? We can move to Ryan, Sonia, Dominique, and then Phil, if you'd like to answer as well.
I think your question, William, is actually pretty complicated, right? So I mean, in the American context, no, I don't think that there are a lot of times growing up where I heard of Black folks being the wealthiest folks around. I mean, I think that we know our collective history in this country that made that so. But growing up, I did know of a broader context, particularly looking at the continent, where there were folks that looked like me, all over the continent of Africa that were doing extremely well and were extremely successful in a variety of endeavors. So yes and no is answer to your question, because it depends on what lens we're looking at trying to answer it.
Very valid, very valid.
So I would have to say that I had kind of because I was in such I wouldn't say affluent, because they wouldn't necessarily say affluency then, but my family was very entrepreneurial. And in that, it was just this given that you either, you owned, and we owned, quite a bit in our town, and so I felt like I was in somewhat of a bubble. And when
we're losing you just a little bit, Sonia.
Idea that the world looked the same, since it didn't. And so I knew of pockets of families, and our family in particular, that lived off the land, that sold produce, that had cattle, that it was just things that we did that I understood. And then I as a young adult, I remember just recently even looking at the idea of we had more land ownership as Black people in 1860 than we do in, 2020, 2021. And I always just wondered how that was and what I could do about it. And the first book I ever wrote was because I thought everyone knew the things that my grandfather had told me about land ownership and real estate and entrepreneurship. And when I realized, like, no, people weren't having these conversations. This is not, the way people were thinking or living. I wanted to, interject that and do something about it. And so to answer that, yeah, and I think wealth is really defined in a different terminology. And I think we have to be kind of careful about that in terms of what that looks like, for everybody. And so I knew about it, but I also had a deep desire to see more of it, in my own communities.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sonia. Lastly, Phil or Dominique, would you like to answer that particular question? All right. Phil, were you going to say something?
Well, I didn't know if Dominique was going to chime in. I wanted to be a gentleman as well. Then let's go first. But just real quick, the specifically because of the history that I'm dealing with, Black wealth is actually referring to the purely economic viability of communities of color. And the tragedy is that so many of our younger generation has no idea just how vibrant Black communities were in the early 1900s, and as we hear in Oklahoma in the 1880s. For example, in 1883, there were so many Black towns in Oklahoma that everything that was run, the banks, businesses, the grocery stores, everything that was run, there was at least 30 to 40 all black towns by 1880. By 1883, there was actually, here's one of those eyebrow raisers, like when you get a new wrinkle in your brain, you learn something new, things that we were not taught. There were so many prospering towns operating on such an economic level in Oklahoma. They were actually having discussions by Edwin P. McCabe to actually have the US government consider carving out a portion of Oklahoma and make it all Black state. How many of you ever heard of that? These are things that you just never have heard of in your history books. Oklahoma was actually going to be determined to be an all Black state. That's just how prosperous the communities were. And again, it wasn't just Oklahoma. When you look at the movies like Once Upon a Time We Were Colored, that was a true story about Rosewood, Florida. These communities in 1919, the outlash or the backlash to these communities, from New Jersey to Maryland to Washington, D.C., to Elaine, Arkansas, to Houston, there were all of these communities all over that were doing quite extremely well while the U.S. economy was down. And actually the white counterparts, those who returned from World War I, those white soldiers are coming back and couldn't pay their bills and the economy was down. It was the Black communities, because they supported each other, that were actually superior. And it caused a white backlash. The Red Summer of 1919 is where people just went in and destroyed Black communities because they were jealous of the fact that I can't buy a car, I can't keep my family fed, but I'm looking across the tracks, the railroad tracks, and Black folks got businesses, Black folks are driving cars, Black kids are doing well. It caused a huge backlash. And, so that this is nothing new. We see that that's happened through the United States history, but getting young people to realize just because you haven't been taught this doesn't mean it didn't happen. And our responsibility to say, look how vibrant Black communities have always been in American history. It's just you were never taught that.
Absolutely. Thank you, Phil. Dominique, I'm gonna move on to the next question, but I'd like to start with you. O.W. Gurley is credited with having established the first Black business in Greenwood in 1906 and was described by Hannibal Johnson as having a vision to create something for Black people by Black people. What would Gurley's model of for Black people by Black people look like in 2021? And what are the advantages and disadvantages of a racially segregated economy?
So I think that right now in 2021, I think that for Black people by Black people is actually taking place right now in different growth spurts, I would say, throughout our country right now, right? I think that there are a lot of people, I mean, we could just start with ourselves as panelists, right? Many of us have businesses spanning across multiple industries, multiple sectors as well. And we're also serving within our communities as well, right? So I think that, you know, in this present day, when we look at, you know, for Black people, by Black people, I would say that it is actually taking place. And what would it look like today? It is not going to look like what historically it looked like in, I would say, Tulsa, Oklahoma, where it was just that specific community. I think something even better is taking place today, right? Where it's spanning across the entire nation and even beyond, right? Where we are looking to get ourselves involved in a number of different industries. We are owning land, we are creating wealth, we are, you know, buying houses, we're buying out the block, we're buying the community within these communities. We are building schools, we are building hospitals. We are thriving, and I think that it's a beautiful thing. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages? Now, I think that I would say that it is advantageous for us in a number of different ways, just given the fact that we're able to support our communities. Like, just I'll take a piece from Jay-Z, for instance. Just yesterday, he was on Squawk Box, and he said that he couldn't get a record deal, so he created Rock Nation. So I think that the reason, you know, for us, it would be ideal from a segregated standpoint. We would thrive. It would be advantageous for us because we're able to support our community and our peers and give access to areas and opportunities in which that wouldn't be bestowed upon us in more of a general setting, so to speak, right? Now, what are the disadvantages? I would say that growth and scale, right? I think that as we're looking to expand, we don't only want to support, we don't only want to, I guess, sell to our own, right? We want to grow. This is how we become that billion-dollar business, so to speak, right? You can't, I wouldn't say that you can't, but I just don't think there is room for growth in that scale if we are only serving our own, just African Americans in that one silo, so to speak.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful answer. Would any of our other panelists like to answer or chime in on this particular question?
These are some really good, thought-provoking questions, and I agree that there are some disadvantages, but I definitely would say there are more advantages than not. Sometimes I feel like we may be in a bit of a bubble, you know, in terms of like what we believe is happening and what's really happening. You know, what is the real storyline versus what people are telling us the storyline is. And although we are making some strides and we are you know, kind of leveling the field a little bit, we still have a lot of work to do. And I think what happens is we see a few wins in our community, and we feel like it's an overall arching system, and it's really not. And I think with that comes the idea that we really don't have to support that you know, Black people are doing well, or you know, these companies are doing well. So I right now I think we're in a place that there's only upside, and I have a business and I have, you know, supporters that are Black and white. I don't think that we could be in an all white Black world, but I think we have to coexist. But I also feel like when you look at a community like a Jewish community, the Jewish community has been very unapologetically successful in supporting one another, and they've been very socially acceptable in doing it. It's when we get too far off the grid and too far like into our own, you know, building that everybody gets a little nervous and know how powerful that is, because you still got to equate to this $3.2 trillion that has grown, since last year. And so it's too many upsides right now to focus on doing business with each other, but not cutting off any communities, but being very focused and very intentional about doing business with each other. And in that, I feel done right, done with the same proper business and Black excellence that we represent, other people are going to support. So I would like to just kind of see us stay on that, stay on that, building our business, and not get too far off right now, because we're not there. Like we're not even close.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I mean, I think that we've got to have some real conversations about where we are, right? And before we can talk about fundamentally like where we're going to go moving forward. And I think it's important to put some stats out there. So I mean, we talk about the spending power of Black folks on a consistent basis, somewhere between 1.3 and 1 and 2 trillion, depending on who you're looking at, right? But what we don't talk about is right now, Black folks only spend 3% of their income inside of the community. That principle that Phil talked about earlier that was happening in Greenwood, where the dollar would circulate 8 to 10 times within the community. Right now, our dollars don't last 6 hours, right? Inside of our, so like we've got to talk about that as it is. I mean, another stat that's been haunting me: 96% of our businesses don't employ a single person, right? And so if we're going to solve the employment crisis that we have, like we've got to be real about actually what we're doing. And like I think that we're great at Twitter and Instagramming and talking about one another, but like actually doing the work of spending money with one another, statistically we're not there, right? 3% is the number, right? And the research shows that if we moved from 3% to 10%, game changer for a lot of communities, just in terms of what those businesses would be able to do. So it's not even talking about moving your 3% spend right now to 50% spend. I imagine that world, but really just getting to 10% is a change. I'd also challenge this notion of like the disconnect between our community and others. This is how we tackled it at TGS. Anyone is welcome to come to the gathering spot, but there is a baseline standard that has been put in place and a celebration. I think as Black people, we are used to being tolerated in places, not celebrated in them. So we are intentional about who we're celebrating. And if you're okay with that celebration, then come on, right? But if you're not, and that makes you uncomfortable for whatever reason, then there are other places where I'm sure you will find your home. And I'm fine with that, right? So it's about us being clear. I'm probably over my 60 seconds, so I'm going to stop. One other thing I want to say quickly, but like every place that we go to has that base. They were thinking about an end user, thinking about an audience as they were building it. I don't think that most of the time there's no such thing as neutral space, right? So let's be honest about who we're building for. And if it happens to be Black folks, this is another thing that we need to challenge. We as Black people drive global culture at this point. I was on a webinar yesterday with one of the biggest apparel companies in the world. They can't sell their stuff if they don't access Black culture, right? So instead of talking about what we do as these niche, is the Black community big enough to support itself in business, the Black community is big enough to support most businesses in business at this point, because they're all accessing the things that we produce. So I think we've got to expand the way that we have the conversation, because if we have it in the way that it's been taught to us in a lot of ways, the idea is that Black people can't support one another and we're too small, right? But the biggest companies in the world understand that their stuff doesn't go unless we go with it. So yes, you can build $1 billion company within the Black community. Why not? The numbers demonstrate that the audience is there, and our spending power demonstrates that is there. Everybody's tapping into it. It's that for us. We're spending all of our money elsewhere. So I'm sorry. I'm way over my 60 seconds.
Thank you, Ryan. Some great perspective. I do want to move on to the next question. And I would like for Stephen and Phil, if you all would like to answer this question. What attitudes and choices led to the burning of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma? Are these attitudes still prevalent today? And how might we prevent an event like the Tulsa Race Massacre from happening again?
Yeah, so
Wow.
I'll I'll let Phil take this one. I'll follow up behind him. It may be hard to follow up behind him, but go ahead, Phil. Yeah.
No, not at all. That's actually a very powerful question, and that's really what's really being addressed. I think the actions, the attitudes, and what we saw on January 6th, the storm of the Capitol, what was very eerie is that same angst, that same vitriol, that same anger is what caused a 1921. It was very, very eerie in what we visioned and what you saw, that just outrage and just mass people just, and then for some of them, not very many, but some of them almost after it's done, like, wow, what did we just do? And that's a lot of what happened from the aftermath of 1921 is there were many white citizens that were just horrified. Like, how in the world did we just really destroy a community? There was that mindset. In fact, I don't want people to think that it was just all white people trying to kill folks back then. There, we have in the museum, there will be records of the downtown large churches, Holy Cathedral and First Presbyterian, the list goes on, where they actually went and found some of those victims, and they called them refugees, pulled them and brought them into church bases to feed them, to protect them. So there was that white allyship that was there, even back in 1921. But the elevator incident is what's attributed to the sparking. A 19-year-old Black boy, Dick Rowland, the 17-year-old white girl, Sarah Page. An incident happens on the elevator. It is reported falsely in the newspaper that he tried to rape her and attack her on that elevator. And then later the next day, May 31st, they arrest him. There's a call for a lynching. A half a dozen Black men march down to the courthouse to protect him so that there is not a lynching. And that's where the wrestling over a gun takes place. The gun discharges at 10:30 that night. Boom. That was the match that struck, the striking of the match. But what was building up, the striking of that match was the years of racial animosity that was building. These communities of color seem to be growing, seem to be thinking that, and it's a term that my grandfather who grew up in the South would say, these Black folks are getting uppity. They think they're just as good as we are because they can drive nice cars. They can operate independent of us in their own world. And by the time you get to 1919, again, the Red Summer of 1919 was an example of that. 6 months of just community after over 15 incidents where white mobs just went into Black communities and destroyed them, all because they were jealous of their lifestyle that they could live amongst themselves. So all of that is the backdrop that leads up to a 1921. And yes, we saw on January 6th, some of those tensions, that fear that we as the white majority are being diminished, while this community that has always been the minority are starting to get to the point where they're, making further inroads in wealth, in distribution of that wealth, in power, in public policy, and seeing that growth. Our role, or one of my roles, is to convince, not to necessarily convince, but let white people know that when I say I'm pro-Black, it does not mean I'm anti-white. And having to have that discussion that we're not here to put you down or say, okay, now it's our turn. Now we're going to do to you what you did to us. But there's this fear, there's this underlying fear that if they get in power, look what they're going to do to us. And we've got to be more cognizant that that is a real fear. It's real that they have. And for us to be able to sit down and have those conversations, that we're about building alliances, that we're moving forward. We're not going to shun back and not talk about the pride that we have of being Black and Black excellence, but we're all about just saying, hey, we're here and we want to educate, we want to enlighten, but we also want to talk down and destroy that underlying underbelly of racism that still lies in some communities that came to a head in the last 4 years of this administration, or the past administration.
Absolutely. Thank you, Phil. Stephen, I'm actually going to move on to the next question and have you start with that one if you're okay with that. One of the most powerful scenes in Lovecraft Country, Rewind 1921 episode, was the sacrificial horror of Nana Hattie's death, where she said, "When my great-great-grandson is born, he will be my faith turned flesh." What is your interpretation of that statement? And what are ways that generational wealth can be passed down in the Black community?
Yeah, so from that statement, just from watching Lovecraft Country, that scene was actually just a touching scene for me in general. I think it touched a lot when it comes to the Black community, just because the great grandmother she wanted to make sure that her vision and everything she instilled and built for the family was going to be continued for generations to come. So Atticus' job was really just to kind of take a lot of those things in and kind of realize the origins of his family and what they built and what they were trying to pass down. And I think that's a big point, pivot point for us in the Black community also. I think we get to a point, or as African Americans in general, where while you're growing up, you're hustling for yourself. But when you get to a certain age, you start having children, and things like that. You're no longer hustling for yourself. You're hustling to make sure they have great futures, and you're also empowering them to kind of be educated on certain things. So I think our duty also is to challenge ourselves, our families, as well as our friends and everyone around us to pass down that knowledge and that generational wealth. And that way we can kind of empower, one another in the future to come. A lot of the barriers that our ancestors ran into, we actually have more resources now to educate ourselves on financial literacy, wealth creation, building multiple streams of income and things like that. So it's more so of like, I'm super big on just kind of like just empowering the people around me and just kind of making sure, hey, if I'm a resource, let me be a resource. And I think Ryan, he touched on a good point of really just keeping that Black dollar in the community and investing in us. The biggest thing is just like when we invest in ourselves, it doesn't even have to be monetary. I'm learning the most valuable thing is time that we have on earth. And if we can trade, it doesn't even have to be a monetary trade. If we can barter skills between Black businesses, we'll have more successful Black businesses. If we can kind of share skills and not, align or kind of like, I guess, charge a lot of money to learn different things and educate people or block people out from resources and kind of pass those resources down to others. I think that's a way that we can step in the right direction. So, in summary, that scene was just all about just really Atticus taking everything in that, that she believed in and passing it down to his son and generations to come also.
Thank you, Stephen. Before I move to Dominique to answer that particular question, someone did put in the chat, panelists, if you know any documentaries or books related to Black Wall Street or the Tulsa Race Massacre, if you don't mind dropping that in the chat for our participants. All right, Dominique.
So I think that for me, what I think about when it comes to the term where your great-great-grandson is born and he is my faith turned to flesh, I often think about that line as I'm basically standing on, the way that I took it was I'm standing on my ancestors' shoulders, so to speak. And I often think about in everything that I do that I am my ancestors' wildest dreams. Without them, I would not be here. I would not be able to do any of the things that I am doing. So I try to make sure that, I'm intentional about pushing our culture forward, our race forward. And when it comes to generational wealth, and for me, and as Stephen said, I definitely try to be a resource to my peers around me. And I think it's important that we all do that, right? That we spread that knowledge. I think that is extremely important. Now, I think what is fundamentally profound, I think that what is going to be the advancement of us is really financial literacy. And I think that that is the epicenter of the advancement of our culture, so to speak, right? I think that it is important, if not, I can't even say or stress the importance of really educating, not even just us as adults, but from a very young age, what the value of a dollar is, right? And that is going to be the way that we kind of propel us forward. For me, I think that what we need to do as well is kind of dispel that myth of, when I was growing up, like my parents would always tell me, you know, money doesn't grow on trees, money doesn't grow on trees. And, you know, for me,
Dominique, I think we're having some connection issues. All right, I'll give her a second to adjust.
Can you hear me now?
All right, I see you. Yes, absolutely.
Well, my internet is probably touch and go right now, but I know I'm way over my 60 seconds. But yes, generational wealth is extremely important. So the point that I really want to make is that we need to be planting the right seeds, right? And it's not only like ownership, it's not only, you know, having your own business, but like Ryan said, it's about employing some of our people, right? So that we could circulate that Black dollar, right? I think that is extremely important. And I'll pause there and I'll let my other panelists answer.
Thank you much, Dominique. Before we move on to the next question, there was a comment from one of the participants. This is directed towards Phil. If you could give search terms for the New Jersey Massacre that you mentioned early, they would like to learn more about it. I believe that says NJ, and I'm assuming that's New Jersey. If that is not New Jersey, whoever put this in the chat, just clarify.
That's New Jersey.
Absolutely awesome sauce.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, that was one of the places of story. So they can actually go and just research. You can do a Google or even Wiki and just type in Red Summer of 1919. You can just type in Red Summer of 1919, and you will see a lot of research. And Wiki did a really good job of actually listing out the different Black communities that were destroyed during that summer. And it lists out those cities, New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Maryland and Baltimore, and list those out. So Red Summer of 1919, you'll find out a lot of eye-opening information.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. This next question, we will start with Sonia. How has America's history of slavery, Jim Crow laws, and racial discrimination impacted Black entrepreneurial growth? And how do these disparities in Black communities affect Black families and communities?
So I think one of the greatest fortunes that I had was being mentored by the late Herman J. Russell of the iconic H.J. Russell and Company. He was like this master, you know, developer, entrepreneur, and for 12 years I got to sit at his feet, and it was just, you know, absolutely amazing. In that, I got to meet people like the late James Pascal. You know, it was the history of Pascal's restaurant in particular. When we look at something like that, we look at the fortitude that came out of Black entrepreneurship, the idea that they were willing to create what they didn't have and how well that worked for them. So you think about, you know, just being able to go to a diner and discuss a plan or anything. There was not a place that Black people could go. So out of necessity came Pascal's restaurant. And, you know, when Pascal's restaurant first opened, Robert and James Pascal were going back and forth because they didn't have a stove. They couldn't afford to buy a stove. They were cooking the chicken and stuff at their house and then bringing it to the restaurant. Then out of that, you know, they opened a hotel. They needed entertainment and nightlife. And so when you think that, it was this necessity that grew out of people saying, you know, we can do this. We can build what we don't see. And they weren't afraid to imagine and to really reimagine. And so, and I think that that's important for someone like me who gets to, you know, be mentored under that type of leadership and wisdom, because it shows that it can be done. And so with me having an 11-year-old, I take him everywhere. He's a part of, you know, the businesses and part of entrepreneur. I mean, he's like a serial entrepreneur, and he's 11 years old. because he understands, you know, what that really means to his future and to his gifts and talents, and he realizes that how he serves the world and what he brings. And so Black entrepreneurship is extremely important, and it's something that feed families and feed generations and generations, you know, to come. And so I would say that, you know, yes, absolutely. And we have to go back to that same kind of fortitude that those men and women had, that said, if it's not here, we're going to create it, and we're going to make a pact to support and stick together. And I think that that's, you know, what we can learn.
Thank you, Sonia. And just to repeat the question for those who may have missed it, it says, how has America's history of slavery, Jim Crow laws, and racial discrimination impacted Black entrepreneurial growth? And how do these disparities affect Black families and communities? And any of our panelists, would you like to answer before we move on to the next question?
I'll be very, very, I won't use my 60 seconds. I'll just say that I think that what all of those things have done extremely well are two things. The first thing is that they have denied us resources that we need. Also, every type of capital that you can imagine has been denied to us over time, making it very, very difficult to get into the game. The second thing that all of those things have done is made us believe that the reason why we were denied those resources has something to do with us, right? And so then there becomes a psychological component to believing that you almost become a tool in your own oppression, right? Because you believe that the reason why you haven't been able to be successful is because of some, you know, some thing that you haven't worked for or worked to accomplish, when really, right, I totally agree with Dominique's point around the need to make sure that folks are financially literate. The part about that we also have to discuss is that even if you become financially literate, what the stats show us is that these banks and institutions will still not loan us capital. So you can learn all you want to in America about some of these products, but the system is not set up at scale to allow us to fully participate in it. And so until we challenge that piece of the equation, yes, know it ourselves. Let's work to make sure that we understand, right? But there are a lot of Black folks out there that understand a whole bunch, right? And a bunch of knowledge doesn't necessarily equate to a bunch of capital, just to use that as an example. So racism broadly, I think, is what all your question rolls up to. What it does is make you believe that there's something about you that makes that so, when it's really us playing on a very, very, very uneven playing field.
Thank you, Ryan. And that point actually kind of leads to our next question. So what role does financial literacy play in bridging the racial divide? And how do members of the Black community who may not have the financial liberties of others participate in closing the wealth gap? And that's open to anyone.
I think, you know, overall financial literacy is definitely important. You know, if you're looking to kind of like educate yourself, I just, you know, think, you know, first you have to be open to, you know, just doing the research and doing the due diligence. I think a lot of the barriers that I run into when I'm educating people is, one, a lot of people don't want to do the work, and that's really the problem. It's not that the resources are not here; it's not the resources are in their face, and they don't want to, you know, kind of, you know, put in the work and do the work. I think another thing is really just kind of, you know, really just knowing your resources. And, you know, I think when it comes to, like, for my aspect, when it comes to the stock market, a lot of people think you need thousands and thousands of dollars to invest in the stock market. But now we have fractional shares, you know, where if you can't own, you know, if you can't go invest in Amazon, which is like $3,000 a share, you can go put $50 in there every week, you know, $20, you know, and you can kind of start small. So I think the thing is really just knowing that, you know, we have a lot more resources and we can educate ourselves and empower ourselves, but it's just like, do we really want to do it and commit to it? And like Ryan said, you know, it's a lot of people with the knowledge, and you know, you have a lot of different barriers too still. So you can have the knowledge, you know, and I've had friends that has businesses that have business revenue and that's been denied business loans, which is crazy. So you see in the banks, they have these, you know, bank accounts with the bank. So the banks see the revenue and they're just like, hey, well, we can't give you a loan on this or things like this. So I think it goes to, you know, a lot of times, if you don't have a door, create a door, you know. So we're seeing that time and time again. You know, we see, like, you know, just like we're in Atlanta. So Tyler Perry, Tyler Perry was blocked out a lot, so he created his own lane, and now he's taking advantage of that by empowering his own people and putting them in position. So I think that, the biggest thing is just really knowing your resources and knowing that, you have the power to control your financial literacy and your future. You just have to be willing to invest in yourself.
So I would like to just say before we wrap that question, the racial divide and the racial gap, wealth gap, really a big core of that is real estate. And I don't want to, glaze over that, because we need all of it. We need the businesses, we need the know-how, we need financial literacy, but we are, forgetting a little bit about this land and home ownership, just basic home ownership, not even talking about investing in real estate. And, I'm really looking forward to the work that Ryan is doing in the DC gathering spot, because there's a political and there's now a, this kind of mentality now that we have to start changing policy and writing policy and being in the room with policy, because you have a lot of entrepreneurs who have traded business ownership for home ownership. And that shouldn't be. You look at how system is defined to say who gets to own a home, and there's an assumption that Black people can't or don't want to, but in essence, they don't fit a model or a mold that says they need 2 years tax returns or they need this or that. And that's just unfair, unacceptable to champion us as, Black startups and entrepreneurs, but yet it's not something so fundamental to wealth building. And so we really got to do some work in that area, because we're losing a lot of ground. And we start talking about generational impact. If we don't have anything to pass down, to our kids, the land is really the only commodity that there's not any more of. So we really got to get real intentional about all of it. There's so much, work to do, but I definitely can't lend my voice and not, put that real estate bug out there in a big way, because it's really needed, and it's needed to really do some work with that gap that is out of control just on real estate.
Thank you. We have about 7 more minutes, my friends. We have about 3 more questions. Some of them are individually tailored. This one anyone can answer. This is our last open question. Well, we have 1 more that's open. So 2 essentially. Hip hop star and business mogul Jay-Z has been criticized for his business deal with the National Football League, which came after his vehement support of Colin Kaepernick. While Jay-Z partnered with the NFL to educate white football watchers on police brutality and to create social change, many still believe this was not the best partnership, considering Colin Kaepernick has not been rehired by the NFL. How do we as Black people reconcile, if possible, capitalism and social justice?
I guess I'll start with that one. And I don't mind. And I'm saying this from an aspect of business and economic capital is close to my heart, because prior to doing this, I actually owned a couple of businesses. I actually owned a business on Greenwood. So knowing the difficulties and challenges when it comes to access to capital, and then how you utilize that capital, it's an area that really needs to be much more fully engaged in. So with that being said, I do not have any problem with the approach that Jay-Z did. There are high-level, extremely high-level discussions that need to be had by certain people. That as the higher you go, the fewer people are sitting at the table. So to have an African-American like Jay-Z, anybody that wants to challenge his quote-unquote Blackness or wokeness needs to go somewhere and have several seats. Because to have someone of his nature and his background to be sitting at the top, highest level corporate boardrooms so that he can make internal changes is what it's about. You can't make a change unless you're sitting at the table. If you're sitting at the table where you're ordering the menu, you can send that menu back and say, I don't like that, change that menu, let me bring it back and let me take a look at it. He's sitting at that table. He made the decision and the conscious decision to say, in order for me to get inside, I've got to sit at this table. That's where it starts. Get your foot in the door, then you make substantive changes from the inside. And I think it was a powerful move. It was a very powerful move. And some of the things that we see coming out are with the NFL and where they've gone, the transition that they took from when he started to where they are is a result of him being there. My challenge to the Black community is to stop making Black leaders take a purity test, as if you do these certain things, you're proving to us you're Black enough, or you're Black enough to be sitting at the table. I think we need to eliminate these purity tests, because there are several areas that we fight this battle. Some are on the streets shouting and protesting. Some are in the boardroom, and there are different strategies that you have to partake in. And some may say some play chess. We got to play we got to play chess while others are playing checkers. Playing chess is what he did. And we just need to, those of us who understand the level of thinking and the level of deal making and the level of getting inside and making substantive changes, when you understand what he was really doing, you support and applaud it, because we'll see the impact of it later on. And if we can just allow our community to understand, there are many battles to this. There's many fronts. And one of them is being able to sit at that table. That's what he's doing.
Thank
Yes.
you.
I completely agree with that. I think that was definitely a strategic move on his part. And I think that I'll say really quickly, I think that when a lot of people criticize what he did, that they're looking at it at a micro level as opposed to looking at a macro level. And they're focusing solely on Kaepernick. And I think that Jay-Z strategically is just trying to advance the movement as a people, advance culture as a whole. And I think that that was a brilliant move on his part, not only for him personally, but for our culture as a whole.
Thank you, Dominique. And the next question is actually for you. So many of you are entrepreneurs with an emphasis and commitment to education and mentorship. Share from your own lens why knowledge exchange is essential, and what's one piece of advice that has changed the trajectory of your life that you're willing to pass down to others.
So I think we briefly touched on this before, but I think that as we all mentioned before, education is, I think, extremely essential to advance us as a whole, advance us as a people, as a nation as a whole, right, overall. And I think that for me, what was essential, I think one of the principles that I kind of lead with is that you want to make sure that I am educating or pouring into my others around me. So I think that's extremely important. And I think that is one of the many lessons that I've learned. I think that in an exchange, we're always supposed to learn from each other. Understand that I am learning from you and you are learning from me. And I think that is the way that we will essentially advance and just grow individually and collectively.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you. Next question is for Ryan. According to the executive director of the Tulsa Historical Society and Museum, Michelle Place, Oklahoma was promoted as a safe haven for African Americans. Do you believe there is a safe space or haven for the Black community in the 21st century? And could you please speak to the vision of these community spaces and its impact, specifically your area?
I'm going to answer this question again in kind of two different ways. I mean, the first way, do I think that there are cities that are safe for Black folks? That's tough to say. I think that there are some cities that are better for Black people. I'm in one of them. I'm in Atlanta, but there's still challenges here. I mean, Atlanta has the place for #1 inequality in the country. So there's a lot of things that are not safe about that at the same time. Are there particular locations? Absolutely. I mean, I think that we're seeing them exist all over the country at this point. I mean, I think what Sonia's doing is one of those places where Black folks are this difference between tolerated and celebrated, where they're celebrated in space, we try to operate in the same way and building spaces across the country where folks can feel safe. So yeah, I mean, I'm optimistic about the direction that we're headed in, but can't say at this point that there's, you know, an absolute safety that, you know, that exists anywhere in the country. I mean, we're under constant, just we're talking about some of the systemic issues that plague us, and those issues travel with us everywhere, which makes us unsafe.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
I just would like to add that I think we all have something to offer, and sometimes we think it has to be really big. And when we have so much, you know, work to do and so many generations and people, you know, behind us, we all have a platform, you know, and no matter if it's like 10 people or your family, or I think sometimes we get a little caught up in how big our impact has to be, as opposed to just starting and knowing that, you know, if Stephen can teach people about stocks and, you know, and community and financial literacy and real estate, like all of those little things that we almost owe it. We really don't have a choice. It's about, like you say, playing chess and understanding what moves to make. But we as Black people, we should carry a sense of obligation to pass down whatever it is that we know, however far we've come. Someone is trying to get to where we're getting, and so that information sharing, I believe Dominique mentioned, is just very critical, and we just got to find ways, and we can create safe spaces that aren't safe cities or safe hub, but safe spaces. You know, I have a women's group that I champion, Inner Circle, and it's a group of women, wealth builders, that come together, whether it's virtual or physical, used to be, and get together to just discuss, you know, wealth building, and to cry and to talk about mistakes, and to, you know, have that support group. I think those are really important, that we, you know, that we create those, and we use who we are to bring those forth in whatever way that we can. I think it's very important.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Sonia. Our final question for all panelists, it's a two-part question, and then that will close our Talk Tuesday, Remembering 1921 and Reimagining Black Wall Street. Can we rebuild Black Wall Street? If so, how? And what are some ways that Black entrepreneurs can overcome barriers in rebuilding Black Wall Street, if possible? And we'll start with Dominique, we'll go to Ryan, Stephen, Sonia, and we'll close out with Phil.
So I think, so yes, we can rebuild Black Wall Street. And I think that Black Wall Street, I think we're currently doing that right now. As with even just the littlest steps that we are taking right now, right? I think that we are on our way, and I think that our people, we are advancing, we are learning about the intricacies of the financial markets, we are understanding, you know, ownership and real estate, and the importance of owning assets and assets over liabilities. I think we are learning that. And I think that Black Wall Street, in its historical context, is not what we're going to rebuild, but I think what we're rebuilding is something even bigger, something even better, something greater. And we're all playing a very special part in its growth and development. And I just can't wait to see how far we're gonna go, because I think that we're doing some amazing things. And to speak to Sonia's point, when she stated that no matter how big your platform is, whether it's one person, 10 people, or 5 million, you are playing an integral role within this advancement of us as a whole, to its entirety. So the answer is yes, and it is currently underway.
Thank you. Thank you. Ryan.
I agree. I mean, I think that we're doing the work right now. It's important to continue to highlight important discussions like this, and make sure that we share information as widely as we possibly can. But ultimately, the legacy of everything that happened in Greenwood, I agree with Phil's suggestion that we have to move beyond just talking about the massacre, but really talk about the spirit of what was born during that time, which is about being in radical support of one another. Sure, that support, given the circumstance, had to happen, but I think that we can pick up on just the fundamental need for us to be there for one another. And so I'm not pessimistic about the work that we're doing now. I think that we're headed in the right direction. But like anything, you have to really understand your history to know your future. And I think that makes conversations like this this important.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. Stephen.
Yes, so I just feel like we have to really just continue to do our part. I have a saying I tell everyone, run your race, and when you're running your race, you have to know, you have to understand your vision, you have to understand your destination, and you also have to remember your why. So I think the biggest thing is it's a lot of distractions out here where we can lose, sight of our visions and, our why. But I think, just know why, what is the goal and who is your audience, and who are you doing this for? So on our journey, we're doing this for our people, just to empower. We know that we're behind. We know the battles that we face on a regular daily. This isn't, and the crazy thing is, which is truly sad, a lot of these things that we're talking about during this discussion, we're facing those same barriers today. So I think the biggest thing is what we can do is continue to build, and then also accountability. Actually, before I went full-time entrepreneur, I worked for a tech startup where it was a lot of like, I guess racial tension, I guess you could say. And it was very clear. It was very clear between leadership and between employees. But I think it comes to accountability. Not only do we have to hold ourselves accountable for our future and our vision, but we have to hold those who are not educated on what happened in our culture and educate them on our culture and why things are a certain way, and those that are open to be educated, continue to educate those people. So in summary, I just say, really just run your race and hold everyone accountable, not just African Americans, but everyone around us. We have to empower everyone and just remember our why.
Thank you, Stephen. Yes, go ahead, Sonia.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I'm glad that Stephen brought up the idea of technology, because what I think has to happen is like Black Wall Street needs to be a model. It's a place, but yet it's a model. And when you have a model, you can duplicate it in cities and everywhere. And that's where we have to be a little bit more intentional about like building a model. And I once said during the pandemic and the riots, I was like, we need a Black Wall Street, a digital Black Wall Street that can't be burned down because it's, it's digital. And so we're in a digital age, and we've been kind of forced into it through a pandemic and through riots and all of that. And what I saw during the pandemic is if you didn't have a real digital handle on your business and a real digital presence, you were faltering. You were, you had to go and open up a brick and mortar and wait for people to walk through the door. Those were the first, people to go down. And so I think because we have a technology divide. I don't want to, pretend like we don't, but because of the work that we're doing and we're able to do with technology, that will help us to really bridge the gap in a faster, more advanced way. But it's the model that we're getting to. It's the model and the conversation and the mindset that is so important to make all of that work. But yes, I am completely optimistic, and I think we're building a model, a new model for Black Wall Street that is more digital based, but more human connectivity.
Thank you, Sonia. And close us out, Mr. Armstrong.
Love this question. Always get this, can we bring Black Wall Street back? In the sense of what it was in 1921, or I should say the 1900s, in that literal sense, on that level, no. And that simply because of Jim Crow and segregation. That's what made Black communities do what they did. It forced us to only conduct business with each other, Are we going to do that in 2021 and beyond? No. Of course, we're going to live in other areas. We're going to spend our dollars in other areas. Our challenge today is to get Black people to support Black businesses in a much greater and consistent way than we have done in the past 20 to 30 years. What we also teach here now is to try to get people to understand Black Wall Street is not a geographic location. And as many of our panelists have already touched on, Black Wall Street is a state of mind. It's you having that spirit and that drive and that creativity, that excellence that was here back in the late 1800s and 1900s, that's still here now, and finding a resurgence, a revibrancy in communities of color in the United States. It is a spirit that's there more so than a geographic brick and mortar location. Can we support Black businesses more and have much more to do with our economic dollars being more powerful and actually being more consistent? Of course we can. I've got an example of the jacket that I have on right now. It's a jacket that's designed by an African-American, that's sold by an African-American at a business here in Greenwood. But we have to get past, and I hope I can say this, poverty mindset, in that things, we have to get rid of this code word that Black ownership means lower quality or a hookup or lower prices. To be able to pay what they're worth in their creativity. This jacket that I have on is a $98 jacket. You'd be surprised how many Black folks will go into her store and say, I ain't paying $98 for that. That's too much. I can go to Walmart, give me a nicer jacket for 40 bucks. We have to get rid of that mindset in order for Black Wall Street to truly come back. If you go to urban centers and go to retail centers, we got to get rid of, in the Black community, you're going to have the strip center with the Sally Beauty Supply store, with the check cashing store, with the five and dime store, the dollar store, and you see that only always in communities of color. We've got to build retail centers that has the national chains and the brands and the local brands that are of high quality, high value, and causes people to see, hey, I can buy Black and buy high quality. That takes time, but that's a focus that we need to get back to, because that's what Black Wall Street was.
Awesome. Well, I would just like to say thank you to our wonderful panelists today and contributing your perspectives, your knowledge, and your expertise on this particular topic. Thank you to our participants for participating in this discussion. Our next Talk Tuesday is a month from now, March 23rd, in honor of Women's History Month. So we will see you then. Without further ado, you all enjoy the rest of your Tuesday, and thank you for attending Talk Tuesday this afternoon. Thank y'all, and see y'all later.
Thank you, William.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.